Breaking news out of Southern California. A Beech Baron November 73 Whiskey Alpha has gone down after attempting a night takeoff out of Southern California's Catalina Airport, an airport that is unlit and prohibited for night operations. There were 5 fatalities. Here's what we know so far. Starting first with the Aviation Safety Network on Tuesday, the 8th of October, 2024, 20:04 local time, 8 p.m. at night, well after sunset. Sunset local time at the day of the accident was 6:27 p.m. local time. Registration November 73 Whiskey Alpha, serial number 1262. So this would make it a 1969 Beech Baron, which would have been stock, powered by the Continental IO 520 engines, putting out 285 horsepower apiece. Catalina Airport, Avalon, California is where the accident occurred. 5 fatalities. They were trying to head back to Santa Monica Airport. A Beech 95 B-55 Baron November 73 Whiskey Alpha was destroyed when it crashed shortly after takeoff from runway 22 at Catalina Airport. They're taking off to the west. Avalon, California. All occupants were fatally injured. ADS-B data shows the airplane climbing to an altitude of about 75 feet above ground level before it entered a descent just off the departure end of the runway. The last ADS-B return shows an average rate of descent of about 1,700 feet per minute. According to this report, the nearest weather station was KNUC, or San Clemente Island, just to the south. And they were reporting winds 290 at 7, 10 miles visibility, overcast between 700 and 800 feet. The marine layer was in, very common here on the coast. Catalina Island Airport is located on top of the bluff here on the Catalina Island at 1,602 feet. San Clemente Island, just to the south, is located on the end of this island at just 184 feet elevation. So with a ceiling reported between 7 and 800 feet above ground level, that puts the base of the fog at 884 to 984 feet above sea level, which is well below the elevation of Catalina Island. Now, the marine layer in LA is typically, and we fly in and out of this all the time out of Los Angeles, is typically at least 1,000 feet thick, sometimes as thick as 2,000 feet. So it's more than likely that this Baron was taking off in the fog, in IMC conditions, on an unlit runway, on a runway that is not permitted to have night operations. Here's the details on the Catalina Airport from SkyVector. The runway is 3,000 feet long by 75 feet wide. For lighting, see remarks. Operations prohibited at night or when the airport is unattended. Pilots cannot see aircraft on opposite ends of the runway due to gradient. Another thing about the Catalina Airport is it's a sloped runway. It's sloped uphill to the west or downhill if landing to the east. And here it shows a 2.1% slope on that runway. So if we put ourselves on the end of runway 4, the departure end of runway 4 here on Google Maps, and we look to the east, you can see the hump or the slope of the runway sloping down to the east. And if we turn around and look off of the departure end here, you can see the terrain drops off. You're on top of a mesa, but as soon as you take off out of here, you're in a very black hole effect. There is absolutely no lighting at all off the end of this departure end of runway 22. Because just beyond this sloping terrain, this downsloping terrain, is ocean and additional islands further off in the distance, unlit. If we look at the ADS-B data from ADS-B Exchange, we can see the aircraft departed Santa Monica Airport earlier in the day and came in and made a normal visual approach and landing to runway 22 here at Santa Monica, or correction, here at Catalina, landing at about 1:19 Zulu time, which would be 6:19 local time, which would be just several minutes before sunset at 6:27. Then we see the departure data starting at about 0304 Zulu, or about 8:04 p.m., climbing to 1,675 feet, and then starting a descent right into the terrain, probably about a mile off of the west end of the runway. And down here we can see this last data point of 1,792 feet per minute down. So looking at the data on each data point over here on the lower left corner, here at the departure end of the runway, a barometric altitude of 1,675 feet with zero climb. One data point behind, they've got a 192 foot per minute climb, level off. Next data point, start descent at 192 feet per minute, 640 feet per minute, 640 feet per minute, rate of descent 896 feet per minute, and finally 1,792 feet per minute rate of descent with a turn to the right. According to the FlightAware registration data, looks like the latest owner picked up this airplane in 29 January of this year. Before that, it was owned by Santa Monica Aviation LLC, which I believe was a flying school there at the Santa Monica airport. But it looks like that registration was transferred to a private owner in January, and before that it was owned by a couple of local owners here in Northern California. A quick review of the FAA database for the registered owner, according to FlightRadar or FlightAware, indicates that that pilot did have an ATP rating and a commercial rating and possibly a CFI as well. And if we look at the history of 73 Whiskey Alpha here on FlightAware, it looks like there's been a lot of recent flying going on here in the Northern and Southern California area, but it looks like this was the first trip to Catalina Island. The AOPA, or Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association Air Safety Institute, has an excellent video here on the procedures for landing and departing here at Catalina Island, as it's quite a carrier landing approach and departure on top of this mesa tabletop of just 3,000 feet long. And by the way, 3,000 feet, that's the minimum runway I would ever consider in a Baron or a Cessna 310 type light twin aircraft. I wouldn't consider it at all with that many people on board, and the NTSB will be looking closely at the weight and balance of the aircraft at the time of this accident. But the point being that runway 22 has that 2% upslope to it. So when you're coming in to land on runway 22, anytime you're on an upsloped runway like this, you're going to tend to get below glide slope. And then for departing on the upslope runway, that has its own challenges as well. And that's all covered in this video from the AOPA Air Safety Institute. Here's what the departure looks like from runway 22 on the upslope of the runway. Imagine doing this at night in the fog with no lights. Can be terribly disorienting, especially once you get off the end of the runway and into that black hole. So NTSB investigators will be looking to determine, was there any problem with the aircraft that would have precluded a normal departure? Was this another classic case of spatial disorientation, a la the Kobe Bryant disaster, where they're just very close to the tops, breaking out of the tops of a marine layer and getting spatial disorientation and descending into the terrain? Regardless of what investigators find out was the root cause of this accident, at the very least, this is a classic case of poor ADM or aeronautical decision making. In the worst case, this is quite possibly PINK or procedural intentional noncompliance. What I suspect what happened here is this flight was planned to come on into Catalina just before sunset, and investigators will be able to figure this out pretty quickly. Was the plan to have accommodations there at Catalina that evening to spend the night, but for whatever reason those accommodations were unavailable? And then did the passengers then pressure the pilot, or the pilot himself simply decide to, well, we'll just fly back to Santa Monica, despite the fact that the airport is closed for night operations, it's unlit, and the fog rolled in? Poor aeronautical decision making. However, if it was entirely the plan for this flight to land before sunset, go to dinner, and then fly back home, that's procedural intentional noncompliance. Very, very dangerous. Thank you so much for your support of this channel that is brought to you by the folks that sponsor this channel on Patreon. Thank you for your support. See you here.